Utah man Eric Richins was found unresponsive at his Camas residence on March the 4th of 2022. The 39-year-old man and his wife, Corey, had just shared a drink to celebrate the latter closing on a house for her business, according to police records. The woman told investigators that she subsequently fell asleep in one of their children's rooms. She said that when she awoke, she found her husband unconscious in the bedroom. He was cold to the touch. So Corey allegedly tried CPR. First responders later stated it was unlikely she'd taken any life-saving measures due to the large amount of blood that came from Eric's mouth. The latter was ultimately pronounced dead. According to the medical examiner, the man had 5 times the lethal dosage of fentanyl in his system. It was established that Eric had orally ingested the drug, which was described as illicit fentanyl and not medical grade. Suspicions immediately fell upon Corey, whom Eric had previously accused of trying to poison him. Less than a month before his death, on Valentine's Day, his wife had made him a sandwich, which she placed on the seat of his truck with a love note. After eating the sandwich, Eric reportedly broke out in hives and had difficulty breathing. He needed to use their son's EpiPen to stabilize himself. Days after the man's death, Corey hired a locksmith to open his safe, which contained between $125,000 and $165,000 in cash per court documents. Eric's sister, Katie Richins Benson, confronted Corey, who allegedly punched her in the face and neck. Back in October of 2020, Eric had changed his will and formed a live-in trust, which he designated as the beneficiary of his $500,000 life insurance policy. However, between 2015 and 2017, Corey had reportedly taken out additional life insurance policies on her husband, totaling nearly $2 million. Although her actions were suspect, authorities didn't initially have enough evidence to make an arrest. In March of 2023, a year after Eric's death, Corey released a 41-page children's book titled Are You With Me? She dedicated it to her late husband, saying it was written to create peace and comfort for children who have lost a loved one. 2 months later, however, Corey was arrested on charges of aggravated murder and 3 counts of possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute. Investigators had gathered additional evidence against the woman, including correspondence between her and an acquaintance about the purchase of fentanyl pills. Corey was scheduled to appear in court for a detention hearing in June of 2023. Number 5. Devin Beckham Sr. Former North Chicago cop Devin Beckham Sr. placed a frantic 911 call to report that his girlfriend had been shot on the night of July the 11th of 2011. The 39-year-old informed the dispatcher that a car had stopped in front of him and his partner, Shervin Alexander, on Division Street in Chicago. A man then emerged from the bushes and fired a handgun several times, striking Alexander in the mouth, chest, and shoulder. When asked by the dispatcher if his girlfriend was breathing, Beckham replied, "No, she's gone." Within minutes of the 911 call, combined task forces from both Forest Park and Oak Park police arrested a pair of male suspects. The men were brought to the scene of the crime, where Beckham indicated he didn't know them. As the investigation progressed, however, it came to light that Beckham had been in cahoots with the 2 suspects, one of whom was his son, Devin Beckham Jr. The other, identified as 35-year-old Cardell Taylor, had allegedly been recruited by the Beckhams to carry out Alexander's murder for $400. Although Beckham Sr. and Alexander were supposed to get married the following month, investigators said their relationship had soured. They'd first gotten involved after the elder Beckham separated from his wife. Alexander was pressuring the man to leave his estranged partner and marry her. The River Forest Deputy Police Chief stated that Beckham Sr. thought the woman was interfering with his life and wanted her out of the way. On the night of the murder, Taylor had been the one to gun down Alexander, while Beckham Jr. served as a getaway driver. Meanwhile, Beckham Sr. made the call to 911 in an attempt to conceal his involvement. All 3 suspects were held without bond in Cook County Jail. In the summer of 2014, both Beckhams were convicted of first-degree murder. Beckham Sr. was consequently sentenced to 95 years in prison, while his son was sentenced to 50 years. Taylor was found guilty during a separate trial the following year. Number 4. Stephanie Burns Fox. In 2022, residents of the town of Greenwich, Connecticut, rallied around a local family after the loss of their young son to brain cancer. Chief among the grieving family supporters was 37-year-old Stephanie Burns Fox. The latter reportedly created a website aimed at collecting donations for the family. Several Greenwich residents donated cards totaling $1,780. In November of 2022, however, local law enforcement announced that they'd taken Fox into custody in connection with the website's operation. Police revealed that the woman was deceptive in the way she collected the gift cards. She would allegedly change the recipient email address from the families to one controlled by her. Fox claimed that the donations were given to families in need from the Pay It Forward group she ran, but couldn't provide evidence to that effect. She was consequently charged with fourth-degree larceny. As of the latest updates, Fox had been released after posting a $10,000 bond. Number 3. Chris Watts. Chris and Shannon Watts, along with their 2 daughters, led a seemingly idyllic existence in the town of Frederick, Colorado, where they resided in a 5-bedroom home located on Saratoga Trail. In the summer of 2018, the Watts family's lives were destroyed by an unspeakable tragedy, which began to unfold on August the 13th. Early that morning, Shannon returned home from a business trip to Arizona. Later in the day, a friend and colleague by the name of Nicole Atkinson became concerned after Shannon, who was pregnant, failed to show up for a doctor's appointment and wasn't answering her phone. Atkinson went to the Watts residence around midday but was unable to find the woman. She notified Chris, who was at work, and contacted local law enforcement. A welfare check was then conducted at about 1:40 p.m. Chris eventually arrived at the scene and gave police officers permission to search the house. While there was no sign of Shannon or the girls, investigators did find personal items she'd left behind. Searchers discovered the woman's purse containing her keys and the children's medicine, as well as her phone, which had been lodged between couch cushions. Shannon's car containing the girls' car seats was still parked in the garage, and her wedding ring was found on her bedside table. Chris told police he had no knowledge of his family's whereabouts, having allegedly last seen them when he left for work that morning. In the days that followed, the man was interviewed by 2 Denver media outlets. During the televised conversations, Chris gave impassioned pleas for the safe return of his wife and children. On August the 15th, he was brought to the police station to undergo a more intensive and thorough line of questioning. The police had begun to suspect that Chris himself was responsible for his family's disappearance. He failed a polygraph test, and after being grilled by detectives, admitted to murdering Shannon. He initially claimed that he'd walked in on his wife strangling their daughters in retaliation for him asking for a separation. In a fit of rage, Chris said he fatally strangled Shannon, then transported all 3 bodies to a remote oil storage site leased by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. However, what actually happened was far more sinister, as would eventually be revealed. Chris and Shannon reportedly got into an argument after the former asked for a divorce. He was in the midst of a passionate affair and wanted to end the marriage so he could start a new life with his mistress. Shannon wasn't so receptive to his plan, so he murdered her, then smothered the girls one after the other. The man pleaded guilty to multiple counts of first-degree murder and was consequently given 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Today's topic was requested by Cali Girl living in Nevada. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comment section below. Number 2, Amanda L. Stewart. 40-year-old Amanda L. Stewart from Hannibal, Missouri, faced legal repercussions in connection with an online marketplace she operated through Facebook in 2022. According to subsequent reports, Stewart listed various items on her store's Facebook page, at least 30 of which were purchased. However, after receiving payment, the woman allegedly failed to follow through with shipping the items to her customers. Numerous complaints were made, and following a 9-month investigation, Stewart was taken into custody on charges of deceptive business practices and stealing. She was held at the Marion County Jail on a $25,000 cash bond. No further updates have been made to the public as of her arrest in May of 2022. If you haven't seen our release from a while back about when playing the victim card goes wrong, then you might want to stay tuned after number 1. There is a good chance you'll like that one as well. Number 1, Todd Kendhammer. Law enforcement in La Crosse County, Wisconsin received a call about a car crash along County Road M near West Salem on the morning of September the 16th of 2016. The caller, Todd Kendhammer, told dispatchers that a pipe had fallen from a flatbed truck, crashed through his windshield and struck his wife, Barbara. Emergency crews were sent to the scene and struggled to save the 46-year-old woman who'd suffered significant injuries. Meanwhile, Todd was described as having been very concerned about his wife's condition while speaking with police officers. The man reportedly worked in glass and windshield repair. He said he and his wife had been on their way to pick up a vehicle that needed repairing, after which she would take their car to a local school where she worked as a lunch lady. Todd had various cuts and bruises on his body, which he attributed to his work, as well as extensive injuries to his knuckles, which he blamed on the car accident. Investigators weren't convinced that the wounds stemmed from the crash, but the only person who could corroborate his story, Barbara, ultimately succumbed to her injuries in the hospital. Detectives obtained security camera footage that showed the Kendhammers traveling along County Road M, as Todd had claimed, but there was no sign of a flatbed truck. 4 days after the incident, the county medical examiner found that there were signs of strangulation around Barbara's neck, along with scratch marks. The Wisconsin Crime Lab performed an analysis of the couple's vehicle. Glass fragment findings didn't support Todd's account of the accident. In fact, the lab determined that no one was in the passenger seat and the door was open when the windshield was shattered. Todd was brought back in for questioning and presented with the inconsistencies in his story. Despite a rigorous 4-hour interrogation, the police were unable to obtain a confession, and the man was allowed to leave. His freedom was short-lived, however, as investigators finally got the break they needed soon after. Todd's DNA was found beneath Barbara's fingernails, enabling authorities to classify her death as a homicide. In December of 2016, Todd was arrested and charged with first-degree intentional homicide. His trial commenced in December of the following year. The defense team argued that the litany of contradictions in Todd's testimony could be attributed to the stress of losing his wife of 25 years. Prosecutors contended that the man had staged a freak car accident to cover up a murder that had already occurred. The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution and found Todd guilty of killing his wife. He was consequently given a life sentence and had his request for a new trial denied in 2022. Number 7. Keith Smith. Roughly half an hour past midnight on December the 1st of 2018, Maryland police were dispatched to a home in the 1000 block of Valley Street, Baltimore, after they'd received reports of a violent altercation on the premises. Upon their arrival, officers learned that 52-year-old Jacqueline Smith had been fatally stabbed after stopping to give money to a panhandler. The victim's husband, Keith, told investigators that they'd been returning home after celebrating their daughter's birthday. He went on to say that he and his wife had driven by a woman carrying an infant in one arm and in the other a sign that read, "Please help me feed my baby." According to Keith's account of the incident, he pulled up next to the woman so that Jacqueline could hand her $10 through the car window. In the moments that followed, she was allegedly attacked by a man who was described as being in his 30s. Initial reports on the matter portrayed Keith as a traumatized victim who'd been an eyewitness to his own wife's murder. However, it emerged during the course of the police's investigation that his original testimony had been filled with inconsistencies and lies. His grieving husband facade, much like the rest of the story, had been a fabrication meant to distract investigators from the fact that he'd actually been responsible for Jacqueline's death. As was detailed by the Baltimore City State's attorney, the woman was actually asleep when the fatal stabbing occurred, and Keith himself had carried out her killing in order to secure a life insurance payout. The couple's adult daughter, Valeria, had allegedly helped her father cover up the murder by corroborating his false report about the panhandlers. In exchange for a lighter prison sentence, Valeria ultimately agreed to testify against her father in court. In December of 2021, Keith was found guilty of first-degree murder and carrying a dangerous weapon with intent to injure, and he was consequently sentenced to life in prison plus 3 years. Number 6. Idon Lewis Kaufman. After receiving reports of a burglary in progress on the night of September the 11th of 2019, police in Gwinnett County, Georgia, headed to a local business called Create and Bake Restaurant and Kaufman's Creamery. The 911 caller had told the emergency dispatcher that a suspect driving a black Chevrolet Silverado with no license plate had broken into the bakery and was damaging the property inside. Officers searched the surrounding area and eventually came upon the vehicle described by the witness. Its driver, former professional football player Idon Lewis Kaufman, reportedly had several television sets in the bed of the truck, as well as inside the cabin. Kaufman was identified as the owner and operator of the bakery that had been reported as burglarized. Upon inspecting the purported crime scene, investigators saw that a number of racially derogatory phrases and symbols had been spray-painted onto the walls and booth cushions. Among the messages written during the extended act of vandalism were the initials MAGA, in reference to former President Donald Trump's campaign slogan, "Make America Great Again." Law enforcement found shattered mirrors, sliced wires, and a destroyed video surveillance system as well. Kaufman claimed to have noticed the damage to his business earlier in the day, but had neglected to call the police. Following further investigation, however, it was determined that the destruction had occurred much later than Kaufman had initially stated. The authorities therefore concluded that the business owner had caused the damage himself in order to make it appear as though he'd been the victim of a hate crime. The fraudulent course of action would have allowed him to file a claim with his insurance company. Kaufman was ultimately arrested on charges of filing a false report of a crime, insurance fraud, and concealing a license plate. As of recent updates on the case, the charges levied against Kaufman were still pending, and he'd also been charged with aggravated assault and robbery for incidents unrelated to the burglary hoax. Number 5. Sabrina Belcher. In 2020, South Carolina rapper Sabrina Belcher ran to be the first African-American mayor in the town of Sumter. During the 29-year-old's campaign, reports surfaced that she'd been kidnapped, beaten, and robbed by an unknown assailant. The incident was streamed in its entirety via Facebook Live. Shortly before 11:30 p.m. on August the 18th of 2020, Belcher was taken to Prisma Health Toomey Hospital, where she was treated for the injuries she alleged to have sustained during the assault, which had also resulted in her car windows being shattered. Much of the footage depicting the altercation was obscured by darkness, but Belcher's supposed attacker threatened to kill her multiple times before striking her in the stomach with a metal bat. The video came to an abrupt end as Belcher was being forcibly dragged from the car. A few days later, it emerged that Sumter police had actually taken Belcher into custody on charges of conspiracy and filing a false police report. The charges accompanied the revelation that the woman had staged her kidnapping in an effort to portray herself as an oppressed victim and, in effect, gain sympathy votes from the general public. The man pretending to be her attacker in the Facebook Live clip was identified as Christopher Edie, who was also arrested according to the resulting police report. In the immediate aftermath of Belcher's detainment, she chose to remain in the race for Sumter's mayor. However, in November of 2020, former city council member David Merchant won the election. In September of the following year, Belcher reportedly pleaded guilty to the charges levied against her, and she was consequently ordered to serve 3 years of probation and perform 80 hours of community service. Number 4. Leah Jamal. In October of 2020, pictures of British woman Leah Jamal bound and gagged next to a gun was sent to her ex-boyfriend. The messages, purportedly coming from the 20-year-old woman's kidnapper, indicated that she would only be returned unharmed in exchange for a ransom of approximately $2,500. When the police were notified of the situation, investigators quickly uncovered multiple inconsistencies in the story as it had been presented to Jamal's ex-boyfriend. It subsequently emerged that the young woman had staged her own kidnapping in order to swindle her former partner out of money, which she reportedly intended to use to buy Christmas presents for her family. Jamal was consequently arrested and charged with blackmail and fraud by false representation. In January of 2022, she reached a deal with prosecutors in which she admitted guilt to the lesser charge of fraud in exchange for a sentence of 34 weeks in jail. Jamal was also reportedly ordered to pay $200 in restitution to her former boyfriend. Number 3. Rebecca Palmer. In 2015, Rebecca Palmer made a series of allegations, including of assault, fraud, and blackmail, against a soldier based at the UK military installation in Tidworth. The soldier, who reportedly served with the King's Royal Hussars and was aged 20 at the time of his alleged crimes, was detained and questioned for more than 19 hours. After he was released on bail, 26-year-old Palmer accused him of violating the conditions of his discharge by stalking and harassing her. She also allegedly sent threatening messages to the man's mother and her friends. Shortly thereafter, the police determined that each of Palmer's allegations against the soldier had been completely fabricated. Subsequent reports detailed how she'd pretended to be a victim of the man's abuse, thereby making his life a living hell in an act of retaliation against him. The woman's anger reportedly stemmed from the unnamed soldier rejecting her romantic advances. Following a criminal trial at Winchester Crown Court, Palmer was convicted of 4 counts of perverting the course of justice, as well as 5 additional counts of sending malicious communications, to which she pleaded guilty. She was consequently sentenced to spend 5 years behind bars, a term deemed excessive by her lawyers, as they felt it didn't take into account her reported significant mental health difficulties. Number 2. Chris Hollingsworth. Louisiana State Trooper Chris Hollingsworth died after crashing into a highway guardrail in Monroe in the early morning hours of September the 21st of 2020. Days earlier, the 46-year-old police veteran had been interviewed by internal investigators about the 2019 arrest of motorist Ronald Green. The latter had reportedly been shocked with a taser and beaten to death with a flashlight following a high-speed chase in northeast Louisiana. As was captured by Hollingsworth's body cam, he'd initially boasted to fellow officers about brutally beating the man to the point of him being bloodied and barely conscious, in spite of the fact that he'd been apologetic and cooperative with the police. Upon being formally questioned about the incident, Hollingsworth's self-assured demeanor shifted to one of trepidation as he attempted to convey that he'd acted out of fear upon ruthlessly attacking Green. He attempted to portray himself as the victim in the situation, claiming to have been scared of what Green might do to him if left unrestrained. Detectives investigating the matter ultimately determined that Hollingsworth's revised version of the events didn't align with the facts of the case, deduced from body and dash cam footage. Due to his sudden death, the officer was never criminally charged in connection to Green's killing. Number 1. Samantha Alonso Luna. Shortly before 8:30 p.m. on June the 16th of 2018, officers from the Humboldt State University Police Department in Arcata, California, initiated a traffic stop after witnessing the passenger of a vehicle recklessly hanging their head out of the sunroof. In a series of videos later posted to Facebook, 5 members of law enforcement were shown getting into an altercation with another one of the car's occupants, 20-year-old Samantha Alonso Luna. As indicated by subsequent reports, she'd refused to properly identify herself to Officer Janelle Jackson, which led to a heated verbal exchange between them. As tensions escalated, Alonso Luna was pulled from the front passenger seat of the vehicle, at which point a second officer assisted Jackson in subduing her. Alonso Luna proceeded to shout a barrage of profanities at the officers as she kicked and fought them hysterically. At one point, the young woman allegedly grabbed the hair of one officer and refused to loosen her grip until she was finally placed in handcuffs and forced into the back of a cruiser. Court records detailed how, in the incident's aftermath, Alonso Luna was charged with 7 misdemeanors, including giving false information to a police officer, public intoxication, battery on a peace officer, and 4 counts of resisting officials. As of the latest updates on the case, it was reported that a plea deal was being negotiated between Alonso Luna and state prosecutors. Thanks for watching. If a handyman messed up while fixing your shower but refused to take responsibility, would you try and get him to fix it for free, or consider it a sunk cost and hire someone else? Let us know in the comment section below.